Gracious Lord, thank you for the privilege of being able to just open your word and to do that with freedom. And honestly, we typically do that with probably more boredom than with anticipation. And so this morning, we pray for that spirit of anticipation, that you would speak to us, that our lives would be somehow transformed, convicted, shaped, drawn closer to you, that we become more like your Son as we study your word. So meet with us. Again, we pray that you just open our hearts and our eyes, our ears to what you'd have to say to us this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. We have been in this series. I hope you haven't started to grow weary with this series. I'm telling you, I'm really passionate about this, and I am hoping, I really want to write a book when I'm done with this series, and so you're kind of my guinea pigs. I think this is a book that could really be useful for those people in the funeral process, that dying process. I think it could be used evangelistically, and it's just something I got to do. I really just feel that. So hang in there with me. We're actually going to stay in this series, Exit Stage right up to Easter Sunday, which makes an awful lot of sense. So hang in there with me. We got our first slide. You just go ahead and bring that up. One of the most common scripture passages that people select to put in the memorial card, you know, the little memorial card that's there by the guest book when you go to a funeral, is this verse out of 2 Timothy. If it's not in the memorial card, it frequently is a verse that people will ask me to use during the funeral time. But the words are, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. But all too often, that verse wasn't chosen because their loved one, the deceased loved one, was committed to the cause of Christ. The selection of that passage was not due to their involvement in some kind of ministry service, their commitment to seeking the hearts and souls of people for Christ. The passage was chosen because the deceased had tried every medical option to stay alive. They had endured painful and numerous surgeries, heroic efforts by the doctor to prolong their life. They fought desperately to stay alive. Christian physician John Dunlop says this: medicine is good, but not when we are shaking our fist in God's face and saying, no, I'm not going to die yet. I'm trusting technology to pull me through. And we could have a discussion now about the ethics of prolonging life through medical intervention, or prolonging life versus just sort of prolonging suffering. We could have a discussion about the morality of allowing life to end. Okay. We're not going to go there. But those of us who have experienced that know how heart-wrenching that is when mom or dad is near the end of their life, and that it is a battlefield. Dying has become a battlefield that doctors and nurses fight, instead of this spiritual experience where we pass from this life on to our afterlife. But that's another topic. This morning, as we continue this series in Exit Stage Right, departing from the earthly stage of life wisely, we come to this passage in 2 Timothy because it just gives us great insight and instruction on how to live well and how to die well. And those two are definitely tied together. You cannot live well if you are not prepared to die well. You will not die well if you're not living well. Jump in. Paul writes, for I'm already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time of my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. Hopefully you recall from our study through this letter, exactly a year ago, we worked through 2 Timothy. Perhaps you recall Paul is in a dismal underground dungeon. You show that slide. Underground dungeon which has nothing more than a hole in the ceiling in which a person would be lowered down into this dungeon, that hole providing the only source of light and air. In that prison is known as the Mamertine prison. It's a maximum security prison for Rome's chief enemies. Tradition says both Paul and Peter were in that dungeon. Today, this structure has been built over the top of it, and has become a place of Christian worship, which is really ironic, isn't it? Rome so oppressed the Christians at that era in history, and now it is a place of worship. I would absolutely love to go to the Mamertine prison, to go to Rome, to go to Italy sometime after the coronavirus is no longer there. But wouldn't that be fascinating? Stepping back into history 2,000 years ago, and you could be in that very spot where Paul wrote this letter. And so Paul is in chains when these words were written. The preliminary hearing of his case has already taken place. He's awaiting the full trial, but he is not expecting to be acquitted. He's fully aware that the executioner's sword lay in his future. And that is how he died. He was executed. He was beheaded. Peter, how did Peter die? Crucified upside down. That is true. So, Paul writes this letter with a very passionate concern to ensure that the good news of Jesus would be guarded and then passed on to the subsequent generations. English writer Samuel Johnson penned these words: "When a man knows he is to be hanged in the fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully." And that is true. If you know you're going to die, nothing brings clarity and prioritizes the issue of life quite like knowing you are going to die. And so Paul knew that in all likelihood he is now writing what would essentially be his last will and testament to the church. Facing the prospect of death, he writes this letter, his swan song, his last words to Timothy, to whom he's passing the baton of faith. This is his final letter, his final chapter. And there's a bit of a double meaning in that phrase. It is his final chapter, both of life and the final chapter he is ever going to write. Verse 6, in a translation known as the Message, renders it this way: "You take over. I'm about to die." You, Timothy, you take over. I'm about to die. And what is striking is how matter of fact that statement is. I am about to die. Could you pass the pancakes, please? There's no indication of terror in his words. Attitudes toward death fluctuate on this emotional continuum that range from rage of the poet Dylan Thomas. "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." You familiar with that? Dylan Thomas wrote that poem, and in the poem, the one speaking is urging his father to struggle against his decline in health and his impending death. Rage against the dying of the light. Attitudes towards death range from that rage to gentle acceptance and inner peace. There is acceptance in Paul's words, I am about to die. NIV says, the time of my departure is near. Why such peaceful resolve? Well, part of the explanation as to why there's not this sort of undue sense of anxiety in Paul's words is found in the word departure. The time of my departure is near. Original language, the word is analusis. It comes from a verb that means to loosen. Okay. Analusis, departure. And there are a number of word pictures associated with that word analusis that are also connected with dying. Word pictures that have brought peace to the followers of Jesus throughout the ages. I just want to give you these word pictures. It is, first of all, a word used of a soldier loosening the ropes when taking down his tent. And that would have been a familiar picture for Paul. He was a tent maker, correct? Strike the tent and move on from this battlefield. And we see that metaphor in famous passage here, 2 Corinthians 5. For we know that when this earthly tent we live in is taken down, and then Paul explains, that is, when we die and leave this earthly body. Yes, this earthly body is nothing but a tent for the soul. So, for we know that when this earthly tent we live in is taken down, we have a house in heaven, an eternal body made for us by God himself and not by human hands. We grow weary in our present bodies. This old tent is getting pretty tattered and dilapidated, and we long to put on our heavenly bodies like new clothing. Strike the tent. Those were the final words of General Robert E. Lee when he died. A picture that comes from the scripture. You know, a non-believer generally approaches death with a great deal of trepidation. For the same reason that you go cautiously through a door into a dark room. You don't know what lies beyond that door. There might be a psychopathic killer. There just might be furniture you're going to stub your toes on. You don't know. But Paul, on the other hand, absolutely confident of what lies beyond that door. Death is nothing but striking the tent and moving on to heaven. Okay, that word departure, analusis, was also used of untying a boat from its moorings. The word picture, beautiful word picture of dying. We loosen the mooring lines from the ship, we weigh anchor, and we sail from the storm-tossed seas of this life to the safe harbor of heaven. The word picture inspired a poem. You won't be able to read it, I don't think. I'm going to read it for you, but it's entitled Gone From My Sight. And it's a poem that is in hospice literature. They have a little book, it's called The Little Blue Book. And the poem is there. It's the first time I encountered it. But it really is a marvelous poem. I am standing upon the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails to the moving breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and watch her until at length she hangs like a speck of white cloud just where the sea and the sky come to mingle with each other. Then someone at my side says, there she is gone. Gone where? Gone from my sight, that is all. She is just as large in mast, hull, and spar as she was when she left my side, and she is just as able to bear her load of living freight to her destined port. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone says, there she is gone, there are other eyes watching her coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout, here she comes! And that is dying. You guys familiar with that? Oh, it's really good. The poem is sometimes known as the parable of immortality. Again, the soul, the essential part of who we are, is immortal. The soul is forever. And for the Christian, that means the soul departs from the seas of this life, and then it is greeted by those who have already departed. That's the beautiful part of the hook in that poem. She's gone. There she comes. And that's what happens at that moment of death. And I imagine Paul would have found a connection and great comfort in that word picture as well. He had sailed across the tumultuous seas of the Mediterranean several times, being shipwrecked at least once. And now, in this dungeon, knowing he's about to be executed, he knows his soul will weigh anchor from his body and set sail for the safe harbor of heaven. An old gospel song, one day my ship will sail. Heard that? It's, yeah. You going to do that in a few minutes? Yeah, one day my ship will sail. Listen to it on YouTube. Emmylou Harris does a marvelous job. It may be best known by Johnny Cash and Earl Scruggs. Yeah, I met Earl Scruggs one time. Such a humble guy. And if you're going, who is Earl Scruggs? You guys need to get out more often. I'm sorry you're not as cultured as me. Do you know who Earl Scruggs is?
Oh, bad. Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't lived. He's just the best banjo player ever. Third word picture. Okay, number one, strike the tent. Number two, set sail for the safe harbor of heaven. The third word picture is associated with that verb, analusis. But it was the word that was used for loosening oxen from the yoke upon their neck. That's the word picture. The farmer would take the harness off the animals at the close of the workday and give it a good pat on the rump and send it out into the pasture to rest. Paul had borne the yoke of ministry for many years. The time of my departure is near. Same word used in the Philippians passage that we have seen a number of times in this series, classic passage. For to me to live is Christ, to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart. I desire to set sail from the seas of this life. I desire to have the tent struck, to move on to the new location. I desire to have that burden, that yoke removed from me, to be set free. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. And just note, to depart and be. No time lag. No waiting room, no soul sleep, no purgatory. You depart and you are immediately in the presence of God. When I die, immediately ushered into God's presence. Rage against the dying of the light. No way. To depart is to be with Christ, and that is better by far. Paul is enthralled with the prospect of heaven. Okay, back to our text. Verse 7, I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I have kept the faith. Just a couple of minor points here. You know, in the Greek text, it's actually the nouns that come first in each phrase, and I actually like the sort of the rhythm of that. It more literally says, the fight I have fought, the race I have finished, the faith I have kept. The word fight and fought, I've told you this before, from the same Greek word agon. We get our word agony from that word agon. I have struggled the good struggle. That would be a fitting paraphrase. I have given the contest my total effort. I have finished well. Let's talk about finishing well, shall we? Richard Cumberland, he is a Anglican bishop and English theologian back in the 1600s, and he is credited with this statement: it is better to wear out than rust out. And we have all heard that statement before, but I find it interesting that actually in its original context, I believe, we're going to give him credit for saying it originally, it was used in the context of contending for the Christian faith. It is better to wear out, from fighting the good fight and from running all the way to the finish line. It's better to wear out than to rust out. And here's the application, because we really are inclined, I think, we're inclined to think that the greatest resource in the church is the youth. And yes, the future of the church is, of course, in the youth, but a church's resource is not in its youth. Youth don't have the experience. They don't have the wisdom that comes from years of living the Christian life. Some youth don't even know who Earl Scruggs is. Can you imagine that? Yeah. And nor do young adults have the time with the demand pressures of raising their family. The real resource of the church lies in people who are over age 65, assuming 65 is retirement age. But just at the point where people have sort of been put into a position where financially and emotionally and even spiritually they can become this incredible resource, you know what they do? They start talking about fossilizing in Florida or aging in Arizona, and they disappear and they rust away. A little bit of envy here on my part. Ralph Winter wrote an article entitled The Retirement Booby Trap. Who is Ralph Winter? He was the founder of the Center for World Missions. And he said, most men don't die of old age, they die of retirement. And he was traveling and speaking and writing for the cause of world missions until he departed from this life at age 84. The question is, what are you planning to do between the ages of 85 and 84? What are you planning to do? Because resist the typical American dream of retirement. Resolve right now, whatever age you are, I'm going to live out my retirement years with a far greater purpose in mind than chasing a white ball on the fairways. If any of you are golfers, I apologize, I can't think of a stupider sport ever created. Don't just wait out the clock until you die. Don't sit on the resource. And you remember that word picture. Don't leave butt prints on the sand of time, okay? Don't sit on the resource. Dying well means living with passion and purpose right up to the moment that you die. Most people don't die of old age. They die of retirement. No purpose left in life. nothing to inspire them to continue on. Verse 8. Here's another reason why Paul didn't display an anxious dread over his impending death. And now there is in store for me, Timothy. Don't feel sad for me, Timothy. There is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. Comedian George Carlin cynically says, life is tough, then you die. Paul says life is tough, but the future is glorious. J.B. Phillips, when he renders verse 8 in his translation, that's what he says. The future for me holds the crown of righteousness. That's what our future holds. The glory of heaven. And the language that Paul uses here is just the language of certainty. No doubt, no lack of conviction in what he believes. This is not, I hope that somehow or another this will be the outcome. No, he says, it's laid up for me, and not only for me, but everyone who loves his appearing. As long as God gives me life, I'm therefore going to fight the good fight. I'm going to run the race all the way to the finish line. I'm going to keep the faith. This is inspiring stuff. It is. Anybody got any questions? Anything they want to ask? Ann?
When Paul and Peter were in the dungeon, they gave them paper. He wrote his thoughts down.
Yeah, actually, the Roman penal system, they allowed people to come and, because Rome didn't feed their prisoners. Prisoners died of starvation because people didn't come to spend time with them. So the disciples would come and take care of Paul, and they allowed that to happen. That's actually a good question. Scotty, come on up and get plugged in and everything, get ready. We'll pray together. But any other questions? Marvelous passage, inspiring passage. Okay, let's pray. Gracious Father, I pray, because I know that this hits just a sad spot for a lot of us. Many of us have just lost a loved one and have gone through that very difficult journey. Some may be at that stage now and just going, Lord, be gracious and just quickly take my loved one home. So it is difficult. So take the passage and use it to inspire us. Sink it deep in our hearts so that when we come to that moment in life, we can be a testimony to our family, that there won't be this sense of undue anxiety, but there will be a sense of anticipation. Thank you. Thank you for the assurance of that. At the moment we take our last breath, we will experience what will take our breath away, the glorious beauty of heaven and being with you. But no sin, no longer any death, no longer any sadness. So, inspire us with that truth. In Jesus' name.